you'll see an elevation of creatinine simply from muscle tissue breakdown from working out. You could see the same thing if you went and jogged a 5K the day before a blood test. You'd see elevated creatinine, and that's simply from the muscle tissue breakdown and that myoglobin in the bloodstream.
It is not horizontal, it is not diagonal, it is vertical. Today I'm talking about the vertical diet, and this is with my friend Stan Efferding. And we're going to go and understand why and what is the vertical diet. And look, it's not necessarily a diet per se, it's more a style of eating specifically for improving performance. And this is mostly in athletes or those who want to get the best out of their eating while training and trying to get the best of their results. So let's wait until my friend joins me. Hello, my friend.
Hi, how are you? How's everything down under?
It's very cold. It's getting a little bit warm today for some reason, but usually it's really, really cold. How are you on your end?
I'm good. It's Las Vegas, Nevada, so it's 110 degrees today.
Oh, that's good. Very warm.
I got my squat workout in this morning, so I'm well rested, but my brain's probably not working that well. So I'll do my best to answer all the questions today.
It's going to be very simple, super easy for you. We're going to be talking about the vertical diet. We did this episode, a very similar one, about a year and a half or 2 years ago. So I think it is good for a refresh, some updates with your book, because I know you did get a book after a few months. We had launched the first episode. So I think it is good to make that refreshment of what the vertical diet is and who is this specific diet for mostly, because it's not necessarily a diet per se. It's more, I was thinking, is a protocol or perhaps a way to eat in an optimal way to optimize performance. But I will leave you to it. You are the expert on this protocol. So talk to me about what is the vertical diet? What is that philosophy behind it?
Well, you're absolutely right. It really came about as being everything I wanted my client to do to be successful. And so it's very comprehensive. It's 30 years of college, competing, coaching, being coached, collaborating with great minds in the industry. And so it's just it's chapter after chapter of the things that I think people should definitely focus on. It's always the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so it's sleep and it's hydration, and it's nutrition and it's exercise and it's blood tests. And, we address a lot of things in there that are really important, things that are meaningful, things that probably sum up about 95% or 99% of the progress that you're going to realize simply from being consistent. My old quote has always been compliance is the science. And so I double down on all the things that really matter. And, when I get a client, I ask them to send me documentation of that information daily. All of my clients send me their morning body weight, their hours of sleep, and a picture of every meal that they ate, and then a summary of their training sessions for the week. And we do a weekly photo. And that really captures 99% of what it takes with some consistency and intensity to realize your goals. All the rest is maybe the cherry on top, maybe 1% added together. And so we focus on the big rocks. And that's what the vertical diet was intended to do. As you know, I competed in both powerlifting and bodybuilding. So I have, and this is conservative, in 30 years of competing, I've gained and lost well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career. I know what it feels like to be over 300 pounds and have metabolic syndrome and fatty liver and high blood sugars and be exhausted and tired and poor blood work. I've been there. I understand that. And how hard it is to get there in terms of the amount of food that you have to eat to succeed as a large powerlifter, bodybuilder, strongman, NFL football lineman. But I've also dieted down to single-digit body fat to compete as a professional bodybuilder many, many times throughout my career. And I've done that many different ways, from partial fasting to keto diets to excessive cardio to over restriction of whether it's macros or just particular foods. And so, just based on personal experience, I have formulated a pretty good plan. And then many years ago, 5 years ago, I partnered with Dr. Damon McCune, who's a PhD RDN, director of dietetics at UNLV. And we sat down, we spent hundreds of hours together compiling all the research to support the recommendations that we make. And that is what all went into the book. And so it's pretty comprehensive, and it's science-based. And it's practical in terms of actually having been used on myself and my clients. And now, we were the #1 new release on Amazon. Thousands of people all over the world have read the book, and I've gotten probably over 100,000 DMs and messages over the last many years with questions and comments that I've responded to, and things that you learn along the way.
What is the explanation behind why vertical? Why not horizontal or diagonal or any other form of shape?
I don't know. I think part of it just had to be with being on your feet and moving more throughout the day. It was kind of the move more, eat less mantra. Although that's truthful, it's not useful. And so the book talks about how to utilize that very factual statement in an effective way to manage primarily weight loss is where we're headed with that. But also building a foundation. I've always said you can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. And so we intended to build a foundation, understanding that calories are king. Protein's probably second on that list of most important things. And after that, obviously compliance, the types of foods that you eat, some lending themselves better to satiety. And then how to implement an exercise program that's simple, sensible, and sustainable along with the diet. Because, adherence long-term is the biggest reason that people go off of a diet, is they get hungry or they get tired, and they just don't sustain it long-term. So I intend it to be something that's more of a lifestyle, something that you enjoy, something that you have historically done in terms of the types of foods that you like to eat, when you like to eat, where you like to eat, and just make some recommendations to guide people in the direction that allows them to be successful within their current lifestyle or with their personal preferences.
Is there a particular audience or a specific target of people that you find that the vertical diet would be more specific or beneficial for, or could be for anyone in particular?
It's for anyone. And as you know, as a coach, we deal with all kinds of clients. We've got skinny kids who want to gain weight. We've got people who want to lose weight. Obviously, probably the bulk of our clientele wants to drop that 10 or 15 pounds or 50 pounds. And then we have competitive athletes who are focused mostly on performance and just that last 1%. And so we do address, as mentioned, between my powerlifting and bodybuilding, obviously gaining or losing weight, muscle mass. And so we try and focus on both. On the weight gain side of the equation, we try and get people into a healthy metabolic state first. As you recall, when I worked with Hafthor Bjornsson, he was 440 pounds when I first met him. And he suffered from a lot of the same things that a lot of big athletes suffer from. More than 70% of them have some degree of metabolic syndrome. They have high blood pressure, they have high blood sugars, generally have high LDL cholesterol, and some degree of fatty liver. And so weight loss is the most important thing, and 95% of liver regeneration will occur simply from about a 7% weight loss, and that's as tested with biopsy. So, I made that quote on a podcast not all too long ago, Tom Bilyeu's podcast. I said that even the McDonald's diet would realize an improvement in all your metabolic health markers, that the weight loss is responsible for about 95% of health benefits, irrespective of diet. And I went on to say I would never recommend that diet for a host of reasons: lack of compliance, potentially high saturated fat, high sodium, things like that. But nonetheless, that has in research been proven many times that weight loss, irrespective of diet, I'm not suggesting vertical diet's the only way. There's many paths to the destination, but some lend themselves to potential long-term problems. And so with the heavy athletes or obese or significantly overweight individuals who are suffering from those problems, we really focus on weight loss first and foremost. And what we're learning is that uh, there probably isn't much difference between slow and fast weight loss in terms of compliance or um, metabolism slowing down. We used to think that, and now the research suggests that so long as you're retaining lean muscle mass, that some people may be incentivized better from a quicker initial weight loss, and as long as you're moving and you're getting sufficient micronutrients and protein, that that whatever your preference is for potential with the faster weight loss is potentially you could lose a little more muscle mass, but training can mitigate that, but that training can be pretty fatiguing. So there are some small things in there. I don't mean to carry on, but that's on the heavy athlete side. I would get them to diet down a little bit, and then I could get them to gain that weight back with a lot less adverse health effects by doing a host of things and introducing a CPAP for sleep apnea, increasing vitamin D and choline to help with fatty liver, help to reverse or prevent fatty liver disease, to keep saturated fats low and increase fiber so as they're gaining weight, they accumulate less fatty liver at a reduced rate. And so there are some things that we do when we're gaining weight that can try and, I hate to say, do it in a healthy fashion, because it's you've heard me say before, if you want to if you want to be healthy, don't compete. And fitness is not necessarily health. Fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task, and the fitness level required to be a world's strongest man or an NFL football player or a pro strongman isn't necessarily healthy. So when we go back to dieting, the same thing can occur. People can, experience chronic calorie restriction. Women in particular, oftentimes will experience the female triad. And athletically, that happens very commonly with distance runners and people who are trying to meet certain weight goals. And the female triad is a cessation of the menstrual period. It's also osteoporosis. We also see anemia, low iron. We also see a lowered thyroid, which can cause hair loss and a host of other, depression, etc. So we're cautious with weight loss just as much as with weight gain, that we do it healthfully, not too big a restriction, not to, and to make sure we get sufficient micronutrients, which, when I was training bodybuilder, figure, physique, bikini, which I still do, and I have been for over 30 years, since the early 90s, we saw this a lot, and it happened mostly in the competitive athletes who were restricting all sorts of different food groups. They would cut out red meat, they would cut out fruit, they would cut out dairy, they would cut out salt, and all of those things can be important for an active individual to keep sufficient micronutrients in their diet. Iron, biotin for skin, hair, and nails, calcium for bones, obviously. Fruits are fantastic for a whole host of reasons. Yogurt for probiotics and fermented foods for the gut microbiome. So, those old egg white protein powder, broccoli, white fish, and a scoop of almond butter diets. They're horrendous for a whole host of reasons. And so, I intended the vertical diet to be more inclusive on both ends of the scale, with the kinds of foods that I thought would help people's energy and performance, so they could reach the same goals without excluding a whole bunch of different food groups.
I love it. Now, I have like 6 follow-up questions.
Shoot.
So I wrote it down while you were talking so I can remember them. The first one is, you mentioned something about labs and that you look into their blood works, their blood work, what is going on with their health. Do you follow a specific, or are you looking into something specific when you're looking into the blood work? CRP, their protein, their albumin, are you looking into their cholesterol, liver enzymes, liver function, or renal function. What are some of the things that you are looking when you are trying to read a lab and understand where this client could be at, and what are some of the things that you may have to do or talk about when you find something that perhaps could interfere or with compliance or with results? Or on the other hand, how can you perhaps with your protocols help for this to get better?
Excellent question. I do ask all of my clients to get a blood test. I recommend it for everyone at any age. I was just a teenager when I first had my first blood test and discovered that I was hypogonadal due to varicocele. And so that's something that I wouldn't have otherwise known. And I suffered from low weight and delayed onset puberty as a result, things that I wasn't aware of at the time, especially with athletes, because they do tend to have more deficiencies than the general population, even because of their workload and the stress they put on their body. In the States, we use a company now, or at least I do, called Marek Health, M-A-R-E-K health.com. I've had online testing done for 20 years. I've had well over 100 blood tests throughout the years, all throughout my competitive career on nearly a monthly or every 2 months at the very least. I wanted to see where I was at, in season and off season, right before and after competition, to help see, how my body was responding to whether I was very heavy in powerlifting or whether I was, very, very low body fat in bodybuilding, and then just at normal state. And I'm able to get a very comprehensive blood test from these folks. I have it on my website at stanefferding.com. Just scroll down and hit blood tests, and it tells you exactly how to get it. Internationally, it can be a little more difficult with the socialized medicine. You do have to, make an appointment with a practitioner. It could take a little longer, and they may be less apt to give you as many tests because they're paid. They're not cash pay in many cases, and so there's fewer tests available potentially. So we do a very comprehensive profile, and as you mentioned, I'll kind of go down the list here. First and foremost, certainly for big athletes or those with using performance-enhancing drugs, we look at blood pressure. But on the blood test itself, we'll look at RBC, platelet, hemoglobin, hematocrit, to make sure we're not getting thick blood for those athletes. We scroll down. Next, we'll look at the kidney function. That's creatinine and BUN. Although those aren't very good markers for competitive or training individuals, because you'll see an elevation of creatinine simply from muscle tissue breakdown from working out. You could see the same thing if you went and jogged a 5K the day before a blood test. You'd see elevated creatinine, and that's simply from the muscle tissue breakdown and that myoglobin in the bloodstream. So cystatin C becomes a more accurate kidney test if you're concerned. Next on the list, we'll probably look at, like you mentioned, AST, ALT for liver. You can't always see fatty liver in a blood test. Sometimes you do have to go in and get an ultrasound. There's some other indicators of fatty liver. High triglycerides is one. High LDL. Those kinds of things will be more prevalent in people with fatty liver. But it's a good test as a baseline to make sure that you aren't stressing your liver, which can often happen, again, with performance-enhancing drugs. We do like to look at their hormones, testosterone and estrogen, for both men and women. I don't think women often understand that they do have testosterone, and probably at a 4-to-1 ratio, testosterone to estrogen. Becomes especially important as women age and become pre and post-menopausal. And if they don't have, that's a good time to see an endocrinologist, get a blood test, and understand that you have an increased incidence of cancer and osteoporosis with low estrogen. And so a good endocrinologist will usually, if you're experiencing some of those symptoms, put you on a testosterone estrogen protocol. Can help you with your energy, with some of the side effects and symptoms of menopause, but also put you in a position to where your bone density and muscle density are better. We know postmenopausal as well that women tend to store fat more centrally than they used to. Women tend to store fat peripherally or subcutaneously in the glutes and the hips, as opposed to like men who may store more fat viscerally around the organs, which is a particularly insidious type of fat because it obviously will cause problems with fatty liver and pancreatic fat, which will cause problems with diabetes and insulin resistance and a whole host of problems. So it's that organ fat that matters. It's what accumulates around the belly that matters most. And that does tend to transition for women postmenopausal. It's a very difficult transition for them to see that they start to gain weight in their midsection, where historically it may have just been in the glutes and hips, etc. Calcium's another important one for women, of course. Iron is huge for women, particularly those athletes that I mentioned that commonly end up with anemia from over-restriction and overtraining. And that can lead to extraordinary amount of fatigue. It's probably one of the most common contributors to fatigue in women in particular. And so that's something that, which is again why I recommend red meat in the diet. And these are lean red meats. These are low saturated fat red meats. These are 96.4 beef and top sirloin steak. And when I get young athletes in particular, college or high school, I work with teams, whether it's softball or track or fighters even. I'll put them on a particular protocol, a diet that'll help increase iron absorption. It'll include a heme iron source like red meat with a non-heme iron source like spinach and vitamin C, such as an orange or peppers, or even more vitamin C than an orange. And that particular meal will exclude dairy because calcium can inhibit iron absorption. And so I'll set them up on a 4-meal plan where they'll have one meal that's high iron absorption. And then the next meal will be probably more eggs and yogurt. So I can get the calcium from the dairy, and I can get the protein, et cetera, from the eggs and the biotin and the choline, et cetera. So that's usually how I set up it. I'll have 2 red meat meals that are high iron absorption and 2 more dairy-focused meals. So there's no interference with iron absorption. And we get really good results. It can take months to get your iron back up, but you can see a significant change in energy levels within a week or 2, simply from starting to sufficiently feed yourself. Vitamin D is obviously a good one to typically we recommend supplementation, 2,000 to 4,000 IUs a day, because it's kind of hard to get from food, and athletes do tend to have lower vitamin D than the general population. There's a host of other measurements on there. I don't know how deep you want to go into it, but that covers probably the big rock. Thyroid, that would be another big one, TSH. And for a couple of reasons, obviously for energy, for if your feet are cold or if you're experiencing even high LDL can be the result of low thyroid function. And that should be remedied first before you consider medication. That's for men and women both. And if your TSH is north of, say, 2, that might have an effect on your LDL cholesterol. And which reminds me, lastly on the list, and probably certainly not least important, is your cholesterol panel. And we have enough good information now. We have multiple lines of converging evidence, from epidemiology to randomized controlled trials to Mendelian randomization, showing that APO B or LDL, APO B is a little different. It's the protein that's on the LDL, but it's the one that's the atherogenic particle that will absolutely increase your cardiovascular disease risk. And we're seeing now that is the most important of all the tests, not the total cholesterol, not the triglyceride to HDL ratio. Those are important, but they're not specific as APO B is, or LDL. LDL and APO B tend to move together for most people. So I know APO B might be a new term for a lot of people, but it's LDL-C, but just a little more accurate and consistent across the population. And we test that, and if it's over 100, what's that? You have a question on that?
Yeah, with that one in particular, when you are looking into the APO B, especially when you get this blood test, are you specifically requesting that from the very first day, or if you look into your general blood and lipid panel and there's HDL, LDL, those are a little bit over or under the range, then is when you ask for, let's look into APO B, or is it something that you already ask in the first go?
Right out of the gate. The lipidologist focused straight to LDL APO B. And this comes, a lot of this is Tom Dayspring's work, a 40-year veteran, a lipidologist who's done the research. He's got 6 hours of interviews on Dr. Peter Attia's podcast. He's got, I think, 4 hours of interviews with Simon Hill, 4 hours of interviews with well, there's a host of other, he's done a lot of stuff lately. Alan Flanagan's done a great job in interpreting the research and talking about some of the, how do I say this without offending anybody? I'll say this. I have keto clients, and keto works for a lot of people for many reasons. It can help them with satiety. They experience less brain fog. They may or may not improve things like skin disorders, etc. So I don't dismiss keto as an effective diet plan. But there's a way to do keto right, and there's a way to do keto wrong. And I'll say the same thing about vegan and vegetarian diets. I have a chapter in my book on vegan and vegetarian. I've trained vegan and vegetarian clients as well, all the way up to including athletes that compete. And you can do those wrong. You can eat a whole lot of ultra processed food and still be vegan. And as keto goes, you can do a low saturated fat keto diet. And that would be preferable to monitor and decrease your cardiovascular disease risk. High HDL does not solve that problem. We've seen in the literature now that when you artificially elevate LDL using niacin, it does not decrease your cardiovascular disease risk or mortality. Triglycerides are important, but for a very different reason, mostly for blood sugar and for insulin resistance. And triglycerides can and will come down on a keto diet, but you can also get triglycerides down on a high carb diet as well with weight loss. Those are pretty equivocal in the research. So it gets us back to APO B. You can do a healthy low carb diet and still get sufficient fiber in and stay in ketosis, but you likely should use less saturated fat. That means less butter and bacon, and it means more salmon, avocado, olive oil, nuts and seeds. And you can have a keto diet and stay low carb. So that would be my recommendation. I think that APO B LDL is an important marker. If you can keep it under 80 for the general population that does not have any existing cardiovascular disease markers, such as calcified plaque or a host of other, maybe high blood pressure. There's a host of things that cause endothelial damage as well that increase your likelihood for atherosclerotic plaque, such as high blood pressure, such as high iron, high triglycerides or blood sugars, insulin, type 2 diabetes. All those things will damage the endothelial lining. And so you certainly want to be cautious of that. So 80 would be the number for general population. If you have existing cardiovascular atherosclerotic plaque or cardiovascular disease risks, you want to get that below 60. And that will usually stop the progression of cardiovascular disease. It was interesting because just a week ago, I said that there wasn't anything that could actually reverse atherosclerotic plaque. Certainly nothing in the diet. I know some people contend that vegan diets will reverse plaque, but it's not true. There's the evidence that does not support that. It can prevent, it's probably the most effective way to get your LDL the lowest. There's no question about that. And it can prevent progression, which is important. And how do you tell? You can get a CAC scan if you want to look at a coronary artery calcification scan if you want to look at calcium, but that's calcified plaque. If you have a zero CAC score, please understand that 50% of people that die from cardiovascular disease have a zero CAC score. So it's more important to get us probably a more accurate test would be that coronary angiography with contrast dye, and that'll tell you if you have any soft plaque accumulation. And this can be important, obviously, for cardiovascular disease prevention, but it's also important if you're experiencing things like blood flow restriction, low libido, erectile dysfunction, etc., because it affects the microvasculature and your capillary blood flow. That's why when people take things like tadalafil or Cialis, they have an improvement in their erectile function. But it's just kicking the can down the road because ultimately those soft plaques will just keep accumulating until the tadalafil doesn't work anymore either. And you would have been better off trying to solve the problem at its root. So historically, I have not really been very outspoken about saturated fat because I never recommended a high fat diet. I've always been at about 30% of total calories or less for total fats, and using lean sources like top sirloin steak and 96.4 beef and a variety of sources, eggs, low fat dairy. And so those things are about 30% saturated fat uh, as a percentage of the fat in them. So let's say a top sirloin steak has, if it has 10 grams of fat, it'll have 3 grams of saturated fat. So it's about 30%. So if you're eating 30% total fat and 30% of that fat is saturated, 30% times 30% is 9%. That's below the American Heart Association's recommendations for saturated fat in the diet to help with, preventing cardiovascular disease. I should also, on that same token, because I mentioned eggs, I should talk about the fact that the cholesterol in the foods that you consume, for the vast majority of the population, does not result in an increased cholesterol in your arteries. So it's a esterified cholesterol. It's not absorbed for the vast majority of the population. There's maybe 15+% of the population who are hyperabsorbers that will experience an increased LDL from egg consumption. But for the vast majority of people, cholesterol in the diet is not a problem. The only way to know, get a blood test, look at your LDL. If you're eating a ton of eggs and it's elevated, reduce the eggs, see if it goes down, and then you'll know if you're a hyperabsorber. At the end of the day, and you'll probably know this better than me, even with good lifestyle, some people have familial hypercholesterolemia and will have an elevated LDL, and those people will need medication. I believe, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that Elaine Norton experienced this. Now, here's a very healthy individual, low body fat, exercises regularly, consumes over 60 grams of fiber a day. I don't believe he was able to get his LDL below 130, and so he implemented a medicine protocol, which I presume would have been ezetimibe, maybe initially, and possibly a dual therapy of low dose ezetimibe, which is not a statin. It helps prevent cholesterol absorption, along with a rosuvastatin, a low dose rosuvastatin, which is a statin, and that helps increase cholesterol clearance. So between the two of those medications used in low dose, we see very little side effects. We see an enormously effective result in reducing LDL cholesterol. So I hope I'm accurate on that. I don't want to put any words in Lane's mouth, but I believe that's what I heard him say.
Let me ask you another question. You spoke about skinny fats, and that you get some of these clients that come to you with the hope to look better, change their body composition, improve their physique. What are some of the first things you tend to do with this kind of population that they obviously have no muscle, but their physique obviously doesn't look like their thing? And when you speak with them, the first challenge is that they don't look their midsection, or they look fluffy, and they want to lose weight or lose body fat, but they don't have any muscle. So you put them on a calorie deficit, they will lose whatever left they've got. Yeah. So what are some of the first strategies you think of? Do you put them on a true conversation where, hey, we need to get you to build muscle? It's going to be uncomfortable because you're not going to be in a deficit, but things are going to change over time? Or you're someone who likes to get them losing more body fat first and then get them to build muscle? What is your strategy here?
Excellent question. It just occurred to me that when I was going off on my tirade about cholesterol, that I said you couldn't reverse existing atherosclerotic disease. Then I said there was a recent study that just came out on PCSK9 inhibitors, which is a very effective atherosclerotic plaque preventer, but it also does seem to reverse cardiovascular disease. So I just want to throw that out there. PCSK9 inhibitors are extraordinarily effective medication that can reverse plaque buildup. So on to the skinny fat. This is interesting for a number of reasons, because there are some populations, say those in India, for instance, they have very little muscle in their arms and legs, and they'll have those little bellies. Genetically speaking, people have their own, I guess it's been called a fat threshold. And some people don't have the ability to accumulate a lot of body fat subcutaneously, in the legs and butt, etc. And they almost immediately start accumulating visceral fat around the organs. We often see this in the population in India. They'll be very skinny and they'll have that little pot belly. And their BMI will be normal. And you wouldn't suspect that that was a problem because they're relatively light or thin, I guess you could say. And their BMI is in the normal range. Unfortunately, as mentioned earlier, that type of fat is very dangerous. And my brother-in-law passed away at a very young age, had that exact same physique, and it was a result of fat accumulation around his organs, his liver and pancreas in particular. If that is the case, then through blood testing, if we do see fatty liver and elevated LDLs, then we do want to address that, probably with weight loss, along with weight training and protein intake as an initial intervention for mortality risk. But for those people who don't have any kind of biomarkers in their blood test, I don't like to immediately jump into a calorie deficit. It's hard to build muscle without sufficient calories first and foremost, and then protein second. And as a newbie, I would assume that this individual probably hasn't lifted much weight. If I can give them sufficient calories and get them not to focus on the scale for the time being, and get them just to focus on body composition and strength, that's the key. That's the hook. If I can get them into the gym, get them to lift something heavy, and then get them there 3 days later and they'll lift it a little heavier. And you and I both know that's neural adaptation. They're just getting a little better at the movement, a little more practice, a little more coordinated, what we call neural adaptation. The nervous system gets used to recruiting all the muscles necessary to perform that movement. But it is a real hook. It can get people addicted to, wow, I lifted more than 3 days ago. And 3 days from now, you're going to lift more than that. And 3 days later, even more. And if I can get people focused on strength as a priority, and get them to eat sufficient calories and protein and start to build up their muscle mass, then we both know that long-term, that's ideal for a whole host of reasons. Obviously, they're going to have an increased metabolism, but they're also going to have better blood sugar control. Their postprandial glycemia is going to be improved. They'll be able to eat more carbohydrates and not have any adverse effects on their blood sugars. So all of that happens with increasing muscle mass.
If you have these clients that they seem to have certain limitations as to where they can train, let's say they train at home, they have like limited equipment, but they have the same problem. They are skinny fat and they need to get in a much better body composition. Do you feel like training at home could be a bit of a limiting factor for growing muscle, or can you still build muscle relatively effectively at home?
Not initially. Initially, like we said, the newbies they'll gain from doing anything. It doesn't matter if you get them to do some push-ups and chin-ups and some walking lunges or a Bulgarian split squat. That's 3 things you could do at home without the need of any weights. You got to have a bar to do chin-ups, I suppose. And I have little kids. I run a kids power hour every Sunday at my gym here in Vegas, the Sin City Iron. And I have little kids that are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And oftentimes they can't perform a chin up. And so I'll just set the bar at such a height that they can kind of jump themselves up there and then just try and resist on the way down. And then gradually over time, I'll just raise the bar, an inch or 2 inches, and it becomes a little harder to jump up there. And they'll start to, have some sort of progression. So at least initially. And then I tell these kids as well, same thing we tell our home people, is you got to do your homework. Your homework is push-ups, sit-ups, and walking lunges, or Bulgarian split squat. Any one-legged movement is going to be sufficient with your body weight to give you the necessary stimulus for hypertrophy. And if you just do that consistently, I kind of like them to do a full body workout 3 times a week, because they don't have to do a ton of volume initially. They just need to accumulate enough push-ups and chin-ups and walking lunges. And the only limiting factor to that is really long-term. After about 3-4 months, they just find that maybe they can do 40, 50 push-ups at once. Once you get to that point, you may need some more resistance, or you're not going to get a sufficient stimulus for growth. But that might be a while. I mean, I was probably generous when I said 4 months. It might take 9 months, where you'll see continued gains from just doing push-ups consistently, 2 to 3 times a week. And same would be true of chin-ups and walking lunges. Before you would need to get some resistance, and then you could just add a little weight. You bring some weights home. You get a couple kettlebells or dumbbells or what have you, and you could make a really nice progression for an extended period of time before you ever needed to join a gym.
Now, the other thing that you mentioned is that you try not to focus so much on the scale, but do you like to keep an eye on it when you're putting so much on growing or growing muscle, building muscle, just because there are people that are going to automatically be super scared. Like mostly, if I refer to women, for example, in building phases, they are super focused on their weight. They are super scared. They just like, I don't see myself eating that much, or I don't think I deserve building muscle. So when I look at these situations, because 80% of my clients are females, and I put them on a building phase, this is the first point of resistance. I have to build muscle, but I have to eat more. And when they see an increase in calories, they freak out. And their weight is going to increase, but how much allowance do you permit when it comes to weight weekly increases? Because you kind of want to know if they are gaining too fast or being able to support or adjust their nutrition. So things go a little bit more conservatively, but you also work with your clients. Like your clients, if a client is happy to go a little bit faster, you could do that. But also if they are super scared, you kind of want to negotiate. Okay, let's sign a happy medium, but we're still going to build muscle. I don't care.
Well, you're way ahead of the curve, because you've seen what happens when women gain too much weight too fast. Then they abandon the program thinking that they got bulk. They didn't get bulky. They got hungry and they ate more and they gained fat. And so you're right. We do have to put a bit of a meter on that. Usually about, you probably can't gain 0.5% of your body weight a week and it be muscle. So that's kind of, if you've got a 150-pound client, they probably shouldn't gain more than a half pound a week, because the rest of it probably won't be muscle. And so they can use that as a guideline. Say, hey, if you're gaining too much weight, it's probably not muscle. We should watch your calories at that and stay just a slight surplus. That would be the pace at which I would want to gain weight. As mentioned earlier, I'm not quite as concerned in terms of losing weight so long as they maintain their strength, because we do have some evidence to suggest they can lose weight faster, although it's a little harder to hold on to muscle with after weight losses. But with gaining weight, I don't know anybody who gains, 3-4 pounds of muscle a month, especially a woman. That's pretty rare. It's a long process, which is why, you and I both understand it's kind of ridiculous when someone says, oh no, I get too bulky. I gain too much muscle too fast. You and I know that's the fallacy. That's not what happened. You started working out, you got hungry, you ate more, and you gained just as much more fat as muscle. And so we should put a meter on that. And I think about 0.5% of your total body weight per week would be about the most that you could gain and still feel as though it was a substantial amount of muscle.
Are you supportive on lean gains or like main gaining type of that's concept? You like main gaining than an actual building phase where you add a little bit of a extra surplus of calories? What are your preferences when you are choosing one or the other?
Yeah. Main gaining, meaning having a body recomposition where you gain muscle and lose fat at the same time, or the calorie surplus where you gain. For beginners, particularly beginners who have a significant amount of body fat, then body recompositions are definitely very effective and can happen. So I wouldn't expect a significant weight gain for those kinds of people, and you could still get good lean mass gain and fat loss at the same time. Scale wouldn't move at all, but you'd see your strength go up and you'd see your waist measurement come down. Those are two things that we could look at, and of course your pictures. I'm working with a very popular lifter right now, a female, social media, like 1 million followers. She has the very same challenges that you just described. She had a really hard time eating more calories. And I was trying to get her to slowly and gradually eat more and more and more. She says, I want to cut, I want to cut, I want to cut. And I scrolled through her social media when I first started working with her and just pointed out that her workouts were not sufficient to be an optimal stimulus for hypertrophy. It was a lot of what I call battle ropes and burpees. It was just a lot of exercise. It wasn't training. It wasn't intense enough. It wasn't to within a rep or two of failure on the exercise. So we're leaving too many reps in the tanks. It was junk volume. It was exercise. It wasn't training. It wasn't measurable and progressible. And so I started focusing in on that first and tried to get her. I just picked a particular exercise, and you should use a little more weight there. You should get, to within a rep or two of failure there, because clearly you're not. And oftentimes we see these folks, they do a lot of complexes. Is that what it's called when you group more than one exercise together? You do like a push up with a dumbbell row or something at the same time. And neither one is sufficiently stimulates muscle hypertrophy. And so I try and eliminate a lot of the fluff, a lot of the social media, P90X style. Hey, try this, try this. It can be a little boring, but you and I both know that when you double down and repeat the same things over and over again and measure them and progress them and get stronger and have enough intensity on the exercise such that you probably couldn't do 2 more reps, that's when the progress starts to come. So in addition to the scale and the photos and all of that and the calories, I really take a dive into the training intensity, and it's very hard. Training women for decades, and one of the most frustrating things for my clients is they'll ask me just as they get under the bar, how many reps? And my answer is always the same: all the reps. Just start lifting, because I won't know how many reps until I see you get there. And when your speed significantly decreases, you're within a rep or two of failure. So the pace at which you're moving the bar, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you're about done. And most people never experience that level of strain, level intensity. And so that's kind of becomes the first learning obstacle. And so I might make them send me a video of some of their training initially, just so I can critique how hard they're training. I'm less concerned about the technique, to be honest with you. I'm more concerned with whether or not it was a sufficient stimulus for hypertrophy.
Do you find that now that you mentioned that perhaps a good important attention needs to be paid for technique before even trying to progress in weight or load, especially because if you're doing something wrong, maybe just not be as efficient as you could be when you're trying to perform a specific exercise. Maybe you're feeling it somewhere else and not where you should be feeling it. Or it could just be over time increasing the risk for an injury. So what are some of the things that you initially pay attention to before adding more load to the bar?
Well, this might seem strange to some of your audience who know me as an OG power lifter. I'm that hardcore guy, squat, deadlift, bench press. For beginners, I like to minimize the complexity of the movements that they use. I like to minimize the amount of instruction and amount of learning it's why I don't teach beginners Olympic lifts. They're very complex movements. They require a lot of practice. So I'll put them on machines, and you can get just as much hypertrophy from a leg press as a squat, but I can eliminate a lot of the variables that might decrease their intensity, whether it be oxygen debt, whether it be coordination, like you said, technique, balance, all those things. As they get closer to failure, maybe the fear component of actually not completing a squat, the obvious problem there is that you fall underneath it. So I like to teach beginners the basics, the squat, bench, and deadlift. But that to me is more of a skill. And if I really want to stimulate muscle, then I want to try and minimize the amount of skill necessary to perform the movement. So I'll put leg extensions, lying leg curls, leg press, standing bench press machine. Any of the machines that are controlled with the pins. For beginners, those are fantastic. You don't have to think about it. And now I'm just trying to see, can I get intensity out of them? Can I get sufficient intensity so that they can provide a stimulus for hypertrophy?
Love that. And I think it is super important to just think that you don't need to overcomplicate it. It's a little bit more boring, but a lot of people dismiss quite early utilizing machines that are quite useful and very effective, especially in facilitating your training, making super easy the amount of intensity that you can go to, because they are just there to move the muscle that you need to move. That's nothing else that is overcomplicated. So I love that you're pointing out that machines are legit. You can use them, and it can be an amazing tool, especially for beginners that have no skills lifting. And I guess you can also incorporate some of these complex lifts slowly without load, focusing on technique, and then as you gain confidence in performing the movement, then you can start adding some weight to the body. Earning the
Yeah, agreed. And I'll tell you a strategy that we utilize as trainers that's very, very effective. You go to some powerlifting gyms and you see a big board on the wall, squat, bench, deadlift, and you see the record for the gym. We utilize that for all of our clients. The board on the wall has a list of every one of our clients, and it has a whole bunch of different exercises. It's not just squat, bench, deadlift. It could be leg press, lying dumbbell press, incline press, and it's not just singles. It's fives, tens, and we asked our clients to, if it's upper body day, pick an upper body movement, set a PR. And that's kind of how we go after it. It's not a 1 rep max. It could be a 5 rep max. And I want to see a PR. And that way I know that they're progressing on the movements that matter. A push, pull, and a leg movements, usually a multi-joint movement. And over time, plus they start looking at other clients, they're similar sex and age. They'll see the other women in their 50s or 40s and see what they're doing. And it becomes an incentive for them just within that little group to say, oh, she's doing that, I can do that. It becomes believable. It becomes a goal. You need a carrot of sorts, to incentivize people to continue to pursue. And I think strength's the best thing to pursue. And again, not 1 rep maxes, and possibly not even squats. It could be your 5 rep leg press. All of those things matter to me. And so that's how when somebody comes in, what am I doing today? And I'll know whether it's push, pull, or legs, or upper or lower. And then I'm going right to the board. I said, oh, which one of these are you going to beat today? I want you to set a PR. I teach my 7-year-olds what's a PR. They all know it's a personal record, and I want them to set a PR.
That's awesome. Now, the last question I had for you is, when you're trying to work with someone that maybe is a long-term athlete, and you see that it's coming with that female thriad. She has no blood menstrual cycle, regular menstrual cycle. She's very skinny. She has very low libido. What are some of the strategies, things that you do with this particular client to get them in a better place? Especially, okay, we need to get your cycle back. What are some of the things that the real conversations you have to have with this particular client to get them training, potentially adjusting their training volume? They need to adjust some of these things to get their body in a much settled, better place to recover that cycle, and then get them to eat more. Find the right strategy for them. So what are some of the things you do?
Well, I think first and foremost, when we start with a detailed questionnaire, we'll want to find out if they feel as though they have an eating disorder, in which case we would want to get them to the proper professional to counsel them on that. That's very important, because you can make a whole lot of recommendations as to what you think people should do or need to do, and that comes first. You've got to make sure that psychologically that they're on the same page, that they understand they have a problem and they need help. But after that, on the questionnaire, I ask those things of women. Are you having a regular menstrual cycle? Have you had a recent blood test? In which case I would endeavor to get one, because I want to find out, how's your energy? Are you experiencing fatigue? Those kinds of things. Cold feet, I want to see if there's thyroid, any hair loss, a whole host of things I'm trying to find out, in which case, want to make some recommendations. And if in fact that they were, don't feel as though they have any problem, psychologically with eating, and they acknowledge that they do have amenorrhea, maybe some fatigue, maybe we do a blood test and find some low iron, then the answer would be to provide them the information to help them understand the reason for that is usually chronic calorie restriction is first and foremost, and then beyond that, any type of food restrictions that if they have a particular food that they just won't eat for some reason, we might want to ask if it's not an eating disorder issue, maybe they've heard something that dairy's bad, meat's bad, eggs are bad, fruit's bad. And if they've heard those things, then I would endeavor to try and provide them the literature to suggest that in fact that isn't true, and it can be very helpful for you. And in which case we could try and design a diet that includes all of that, and maybe not attack. If we try and increase calories and add in a whole bunch of foods that they had some aversion to, it might be hard for them to distinguish between the weight gain and the foods that you're introducing. So I might introduce the foods first. Let's get 3 ounces of steak here. Let's throw a yolk into this egg white omelet there. Let's add a little fat-free Greek yogurt and fruit here. If I can get those 3 things done, and maybe not scare them with a bunch of weight gain right out of the bat, then we can increase calories later. Give me 30 days just to reintroduce some foods, and then next step will be to start slowly increasing calories, just so you see that these aren't bad calories and you're not gaining weight because of these foods. And then we can work on getting enough calories to solve the other problems, the chronic restriction.
Are you an advocate or really like your clients to track, or do you prefer them to follow a meal plan? What are some of your best preferences when it comes to using either?
It's personal preference, to be honest with you, which one helps you comply the best. Having said that, people should have some baseline of knowledge as to what, particularly when it comes to calories. If they're drinking a Starbucks vanilla latte that has 700 calories in it and they aren't aware, that's an education piece that they should be aware of. And the only way to kind of get that information is to start logging those things. The difference between a chicken salad at Cheesecake Factory and the fettuccine Alfredo is 1,500 calories. So, and whether or not your top sirloin is grilled or your ribeye is pan fried in oil and has a cube of butter cooked on top of it, another 1,000 calorie difference. And so little things like that, even dipping sauces at a lot of these fast food restaurants that people frequent, they probably don't realize those things can have 300 calories in them. So I want to try and get them educated I'll call them hidden calories. Usually it's the ones that are the oils, not to demonize, but it's just they're high calorie, whether it's a pat of butter, or even olive oil on a salad. Just a tablespoon, that's going to give you 100 calories, 2 tablespoons, damn near 300 calories. They add up pretty quick. And so if I can just create some awareness, and that happens best with some sort of tracker, so they can be, oh, geez, I didn't know they had that many calories in it. And once they have that baseline, then they can start to, especially if they're trying to diet, they can start to pick foods that are a little lower in calories and maybe more nutrient dense.
The last 2 questions, and I'm going to let you go because I'm aware of your time. And it's more like overrated, underrated. When you think about nutrient timing, say pre-sleep meals, breakfast, when it comes to recovery and optimizing recovery and muscle growth, do you think these strategies are overrated or underrated?
Boy, that's a hard one. We've got so much new information about nutrient timing, the chrononutrition information that's come out. We know that if you control for calories and protein, whether you eat 2 meals a day or 6 meals a day, and if they're equivalent in calories and protein, we see the same outcomes in terms of weight gain or weight loss. Same thing would be true whether you eat the bulk of your calories in the morning or at night, if you equate for calories. Now, there could be an influence on satiety, the number of calories that you eat. If you front load more of your calories in the morning, you may be less hungry later in the day. We also see an improvement in insulin sensitivity in the morning. So your carbs in the morning will result in a lower postprandial glycemia, peak and duration. So there are some minor benefits once you go past total calories and protein in terms of satiety and when you're eating what we call ad libitum, as you know, just just eating to your preference as opposed to everything being measured, people tend to have a lower ad libitum calorie consumption with a larger breakfast, a smaller lunch, and the smallest dinner. King for breakfast, prince for lunch, pauper for dinner. There might also be some benefits in terms of sleep to help you get to sleep better at night if you have a smaller meal, not too late in the evening. So again, equating for calories and protein, no difference. Now, the International Society of Sports Nutrition does suggest you get at least 3 evenly spaced, and they recommend 4 for athletes in particular, evenly spaced meals that have at least 40 grams of protein, or 1/4 of your total daily protein demand. Don Layman, of course, has said if you get 70 or 80% of your protein between breakfast and dinner, and the other 2 meals are a little less, the daily total probably matters more. But I just don't know who eats that way. And athletes that eat that way, we generally just kind of eat 4 times a day. We break it up into about 4 evenly spaced meals with a similar calorie content. And we like to get at least 40 grams of protein to optimally stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So that's what the International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends. We do like to see sufficient carbohydrates for anaerobic training in particular. This is where I have a challenge with keto diets when it comes to athletes, particularly athletes in sports that have a lot of anaerobic output, CrossFit, lifting weights, etc. We see that the performance is improved. We've seen performance improved, say, when you train after a meal as opposed to if you train fasted. And that bout is pretty important. It's not just the fact that you do it, it's to what intensity do you do it such that it continues to improve over time. We saw this with a lot of keto intermittent fasting stalwarts over the years, smart people. Dr. Peter Attia, for 3 years, pissed on keto sticks, and he was a keto guy until he started prioritizing strength and hypertrophy. Now he eats carbohydrates. We saw the same thing with Paul Saladino, who was a devout carnivore intermittent fasting guy. Well, he started introducing fruit and honey because the carbohydrates improved the training bout. Mike Mutzel is another one, master's degree in nutrition. He was keto intermittent fasting, and he started introducing carbohydrates before workouts to improve that bout. And that is where, in terms of timing, where I think that people would be best served. And maybe you don't eat the carbs on your day off if you're a low carb person, or you don't eat them the rest of the day, you just eat them pre-workout. But if you can improve that bout of training, and that seems to be what's most important in terms of your progress for gaining muscle over time or improving performance. And I wouldn't suggest that was just for athletes. I mean, we know that lean muscle mass and strength are a couple of the best predictors for not just lifespan, but health span. So if you want to improve your strength, then how hard and intensely you lift is the primary driver of that. And that's influenced significantly by having sufficient carbohydrates. I think it was Greg Nuckols who talked about a study not too long ago. We used to think that carbohydrates were stored evenly throughout the muscle. And in fact, it's not. There seems to be some carbohydrates in the sarcoplasmic reticulum that are depleted first. And those are the ones that have the most immediate effect on your anaerobic performance when you're training. And so you don't have to deplete all of your carbohydrates. You only have to deplete those that are the most important, most immediately available. And that's a small portion. And so that's why I would suggest continuing to eat carbs, particularly before training, or to be sufficiently carb loaded. And we also see a decrease in muscle tissue breakdown with post-workout carbs. And if you're going to train twice a day, that second bout can be significantly influenced by your ability to replenish some of that glycogen and sodium that you lost during the previous bout. In which case I've always referred to Dr. Sandra Godick at the Heat Institute, PhD in thermoregulation and hydration. And she's got a product called Levelin. And if you lose a kilogram of body weight during training, you should replace that with at least 1, possibly 1.5 liters of water. And depending on your sweat rate, somewhere between 500 and 1.5 grams, 500 milligrams of 1.5 grams of sodium, and sufficient carbohydrates, probably, 75 grams, around 300 calories would be sufficient for an hour-long workout. Kind of depends on the intensity and the individual and their sweat rate, which is generally genetically determined. But You want to replenish that. And that does have a window, where we've said the anabolic window for protein intake is probably more like a garage door. And as long as you eat within 2 hours before and 2 hours after training, within that 5 hour window, you're fine. Carbohydrates have a shorter window. The sodium has a shorter window. The water has a shorter window. You do like to get that within 30 minutes of training, particularly if you're training later that day. That would have a huge influence on performance.
So you'd say then that is potentially properly rated, underrated, or overrated?
I guess it depends on the individual's perception, but I would say it's underrated. I really do. As an athlete who trains a lot of athletes, who thinks that the general population has an athlete inside and should probably be expressing that in order to get the best results, I like a lot of the timing literature. I don't believe that carb backloading is a thing. I'm just very specifically the details that we went through, I think can influence your training. And so I think some timing makes a difference.
The last one, and I let you go, are you okay with the time?
Yeah, it's fine.
Yep. Okay. The role of supplementation. And again, is this one important for you when it comes to achieving performance and muscle hypertrophy? Is it underrated or overrated? The use of supplements. Supplements in general could be caffeine, could be ashwagandha, could be niacin, B12, whatever. Any supplements. So you think they are overrated or underrated?
Again, hard to say. Each individual kind of has their own. That's why I say get a blood test. And if you're a vegan dieter, B12 becomes pretty darn important. If you're deficient in something, it becomes pretty important. It's underrated at that. If you're talking about supplements for performance, there's not too many that make a huge difference. I don't look at protein powder as a supplement. It's food in a can. You can get it from eating. It's just convenient. So I can't really call that a supplement and say it works or not. You'd have to say as compared to what, and as compared to a meal and a similar amount of protein from any other source. It's not really a supplement in that regard. But creatine is a supplement. We've seen that it's the most researched and it seems to be the most effective. But having said that, it's not a huge deal. It's that some of the research that just came out suggested that after 1 year, there's probably not even a measurable increase in hypertrophy. We do see some acute strength results. There's a lot of interesting stuff talking about cognition and potentially energy. But it's not magic. It's probably overrated. I got to be honest with you, especially in light of the recent research that come out and suggests that the hypertrophy increase is minimal at best, if it's even statistically significant at all. I said this years ago on a Mark Bell podcast that after 1 year that creatine was kind of not much better than not taking creatine, and people just went ape shit. But that very same statement is in Brad Schoenfeld's recent research release that it's not a huge deal, right? And this is important to me because there's a lot of influencers now, very popular with millions of followers, that I think we talked about this before, that will take these mechanisms of action or these mouse studies, etc., and they'll make these giant logical leaps and exaggerate the meaningfulness of the outcomes. But when you look at human trials and actual results, it's pretty minimal at best, if even significant at all. And so I'm cautious. I've been in the business for 30 years, and I chased every gimmick and hack that imaginable, every biohack, and it doesn't pan out over time. That's why we started this conversation talking about what actually works, the 99%, sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, lifting weights, 10-minute walks. It's if you do that consistently, the supplements are largely unnecessary. I commonly get clients have this whole list of supplements that they've accumulated from watching one video or another. And we've all probably got a cupboard at home that's full of 30 bottles of stuff that we at one time thought we needed to take that are about a quarter or a third gone, that we've since abandoned because we didn't feel anything. And that's very common. So if you have a deficiency, you definitely should make sure that that's addressed. We don't even see that a multivitamin has an improvement in all-cause mortality, to be honest. The research is kind of equivocal and not necessarily harmful unless you've got high iron and there's an iron in your supplement. But it we don't see that it's significant in terms of any lifespan or health span benefit. I mentioned creatine. And caffeine can have a performance advantage. You tend to attenuate to it over time. And I did see some recent research suggesting that the dose doesn't really matter, whether it's 100 milligrams or 600 milligrams. We seem to see a pretty similar improvement in acute improvement in performance. Uh, I'm not a huge user of caffeine because I don't respond very well. I get jittery. From time to time, I might use a caffeine theanine blend, which prevents me from getting jittery. It just keeps you real focused. And so you might be able to train a little longer without being distracted and not hit the wall. But I use a little bit of sodium as well. I like to come to the gym hydrated, and I also don't like to come to the gym hungry, because psychologically it appears that's the biggest impact in whether or not you're going to train longer or harder. As soon as you get distracted or hungry, it just, you kind of want to head out the door. So I'm trailing off, but I'm just never been a big supplement guy. I think save your money on most of that stuff. And a lot of the stuff that people in the longevity industry talk about in particular, and I don't mean to get off onto it, it's probably a whole other hour by itself. The longevity industry it is amazing, the claims that are made without any human trials, all these mouse studies that people are trying, that just haven't panned out over the years. That people were, just taking tons and tons of these supplements that were recommended by these longevity professionals. And these are the best, these are guys out of Harvard and UCLA, and they made a whole ton of claims that when the science comes in, it's like, meh, doesn't work. So I don't start to hit a personal note there, as you can tell. I get a little frustrated with the misinformation.
Oh, both. I think anyone that is evidence-based and is trying to push the truth to the people, the clients, the audience, is just frustrating, because it seems like you're trying to teach something that is strong. Like you want to minimize the confusion that is out there, but it seems like it's like a never-ending battle that you need to continue fight every time, every day.
Yeah.
So that is what we do, right?
Yeah. And I don't want to dismiss the fact that some people with certain conditions have tried supplements and experienced significant improvements in those conditions. But it's hard to extrapolate that onto the population. The research is generally not there. And we know even some of the best minds in the industry will take particular supplements just because it worked for them, but won't proclaim that has broad-reaching benefits or significant science to suggest that it would work for everyone. And there's downsides to supplements. Ashwagandha, the one you mentioned, can really help people with anxiety and stress, but it seems to have an potentially kind of a long-term dulling effect. I don't know if it's a dopamine effect or what have you, but some people long-term start to get this kind of malaise about them. And that's common with some medications as well that affect the dopamine system. And again, I'm not saying it's bad. People with high anxiety, can get pretty good results from ashwagandha. Some people may get improved sleep from it, but don't presume to think that because it's a supplement and it's over the counter and it's legal, that what's in the can is what is on the label. That's often not the case. But B, that it doesn't have any side effects, because oftentimes there are downsides. It could be dose dependent, it could be very individualistic. But I just be cautious about how much time and energy you invest into something, particularly when it's at the sacrifice of what we know. If you're taking a sleep supplement, but you're only giving yourself 5 hours to sleep at night, you've heard me before, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up next. It's not a fix. So there you have it. It's my preach.
100%. Thank you so much, Stan, for all this time, this immense value that everyone that was able to tune in, and they will be able to watch it later. It's going to be on our feed. It's been amazing to have this conversation. You're a legend. You're amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate you thinking of me. These OGs, we tend to think we're fading away and being forgotten, but I really appreciate when people tune in, and I try my hardest to stay current on the literature. I was up at 4 a.m. listening to another podcast this morning with a brilliant PhD on testosterone therapy. So it never ends, as you know. The learning process never ends, and we often learn things that compete with what we historically thought we knew, and that can be challenging. So hopefully, we just continue to give out the best information we can and to help folks.
Thank you so much again, Stan. Appreciate you, and I love to have you again anytime soon. You be a good boy. Keep lifting. Keep showing to the world how hard you lift and how beneficial and great is for your joints, for aging, like for longevity. So you're a great example of that consistency, that compliance, that showing up every day. So that is something admirable. And you are, I love that what you preach, you also put it into practice. So that's nice.
Thank you.
To see.
Compliance is the science. Thanks for everybody who tuned in. I appreciate you.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.